Helen O'Hare. I'm an editor at Mulholland Books, where I work with crime, mystery, suspense, thriller of all stripes. And I have some tips for you about comp titles, which I think is always a hot topic and always a topic authors have a lot of questions about. So I am happy to give you my perspective as an editor. So what do we say, or what do we mean when we say comp title? We mean a comparative title, which is a book that is going to be like your book in some way. I think the first thing to understand is that a comp title does not have to be exactly like your book. You know, if it's exactly like your book, then we don't need your book, right? You don't need to write the same story again. What we're looking for is to understand what kind of reading experience readers are going to have when they go into your book. So you want your story to be a story that stands on its own, but things that really can be clarified by a comp title are the kind of writing that you're doing. So are you writing a really dark, creepy, serious suspense novel, or are you writing a cozy mystery with a lighter, funny tone? Are you writing a book that is really fast-paced and with twists and turns on every page, or are you writing a slow burn book, a book that takes a while to unfold and is quite atmospheric? There are just many different ways, many different reading experiences and many different ways that books fulfill their categories. And I think what we as editors, what agents, I think, and also what readers are looking for in a comp title is understanding what is the reading experience that they are going into. So instead of thinking what book is exactly like my book, I think it's helpful to think about maybe two approaches. One, what other writers write in the way that I write. So, what other writers are writing this kind of funny, lighthearted story, or what writers are writing this kind of domestic suspense that's full of, say, marital secrets, or who is writing, an Agatha Christie style whodunit, or you have, a set amount of characters in a certain space, and you have that kind of lighter tone, but you get to be a sort of player at the table. So think about what is the kind of writing, or how do you write, and who do you think writes the way that you write, and that's a good way to find a comp. So it doesn't have to be the same story at all, but the same kind of writing and the same appeal to a certain kind of reader. I think it's also helpful to think about the category. So is your book a police procedural? Is your book about an amateur sleuth? Is your book a thriller from page one to the end? Is your book a mystery that readers can solve, sort of puzzle box mystery? Think about what is your book, what is the category, and then what are books that work in that category. So they don't have to have the same story, but they have to sort of fit the same space on the shelf. And you can find that, by going to your bookstore and looking at book sections. They will often have their suspense section broken into, say, mysteries or thrillers or horror. And you can see what books fall into each category. You can also see this on, Amazon or B&N online. Retailers will often break down the subgenres, and you can really get a feel for who is writing in this space and which other authors in the category might be writing about similar landscapes or experiences as you, even if their stories are quite different. So those are two ways to think about comps. The other thing I'll say is that, everybody hates comp titles. I hate comp titles, but it's a huge part of my job. It will be a huge part of connecting with an agent. And honestly, when I try to put your book into retailers, so Barnes & Noble, Amazon, your independent bookstore, they ask me what the comp titles are. So it goes all the way down the chain. Comp titles are annoying, but they really are important in the life of your book. And if you can get sort of smart, honest comp titles from the beginning, it's going to help everybody understand the way that you want to be published. I would say it's useful to know the sort of books that are juggernauts in a space, say your James Patterson books, or your books by Louise Penny or Sue Grafton, books by even, say, Agatha Christie, as I mentioned, books that, everybody knows and loves and do become to be hallmarks in a space or in a genre. Great to know those, but they are really not that helpful for us as comp titles, because I cannot go to my boss and say, this book is going to sell like Agatha Christie. I mean, I hope so, but that's a hard thing to promise out of the gate. And again, Agatha Christie was published in a very different publishing landscape. Even Sue Grafton, who was published in the 90s, the world of bookselling was very different in the 90s, before Amazon, before the internet. So it's hard for me to compare a book coming out now into this landscape where, say, digital retailers are huge, audiobooks are huge. We're trying to think about how do we publish your book to readers the way readers read now. So that is why we say the most useful comp titles have been published in the past 2 to 3 years. We do really mean 2 to 3 years. When I go to Barnes & Noble, they make me give them a title that's been published in the past 2 to 3 years. And if I give them one that was published 5 years ago or 7 years ago, they don't take it. But in the past 2 to 3 years, what books have some commonalities? They don't have to have all commonalities, but some element of your book that you think readers would see as similar. And again, using these really big comps like James Patterson or Louise Penny, it's difficult. They have had huge readership now. They've built over many books. They publish book to book. Again, for a debut author or an author that's had a couple books come out but maybe isn't as well known, it's really hard to say believably to an account, this book is going to sell like a James Patterson book. We're thinking about, with comp titles, the sort of level of readership, and we want books that we want to be aspirational but realistic. So I think looking for books that sell well, that readers know, that draw a following, that say this is a book that people want to read, that's the kind of level you want to go for. But saying somebody who sells hundreds and hundreds of thousands of copies and everybody knows, that's a hard bar to set for yourself with book one. Hopefully you will get there, but it's good to start with books that sell at a believable level, that have been out recently in the past few years, and share even just one to two attributes with your book. So I hope that's helpful in thinking about comp titles, why they're important, why we tell you to pick books that have come out recently, and why reaching for really big, impressive names actually doesn't make a sort of believable or realistic vision for the way your book could be published. So I'd say think about the writers you love to read that are, maybe 1 or 2 steps kind of down the fame ladder from those big names, and those are the right people to be reaching for your comp titles. Again, I hope this is helpful, and good luck with your comp research.